Everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited for today's conversation because we are not talking about an article. We have Ralph Pullins and Mike Hansen with us today, and we are going to be talking about writing difficult content. And what we mean by that is some authors want to write books that deal with subjects such as suicide or drugs or different lines that you have to cross and approach carefully. So we're going to let them talk about their writing process and how they do this in a way that develops their book without crossing borders or making it unsellable. So we'll get to that in a moment, but real quick, I want to remind you that depending on where you are in the world, for me it is the 21st, so it is officially Dorianne Dupre's A Day Without Coffee. So this morning I'm drinking tea. I went to bit.ly.com, no coffee for cancer, and I donated my cup of coffee this morning to Dory's fight for cancer. And so I really wish you guys would do that too. $5. If we can get 200 people to donate $5, Dory will meet her cancer research goal. So help Dorianne Dupre out. Again, that is bit.ly/no coffee for cancer. Also, if you like to read, join us on Facebook. The book club is currently into this little gem, A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. That will last until the end of the month. And then next month for August, we're going to be reading The Moor's Account for our modern. This is a great book. It's about the first black explorer of America. And for our classic, the book club voted in Moby Dick. So we have 2 weeks to read this beast. Join us. We talked about it a little last week, Ralph. I know you're excited about that. So, all right. So, if you have never read the books that these two guys have put out, they do deal with some fun, well, maybe not fun, but difficult subjects, but they approach them in a fun, relatable, and readable way. And I do believe if we ever get one of our books banned, it will be one of your guys' first, and then quickly followed by maybe David O'Sullivan's new one. So I'm hoping he is able to jump in, but he's in Australia doing teaching and things, so we'll see. So let's get this going. How do you even start, you guys, when you have a subject and you know that you can turn it into a really good story that a lot of people will relate to? Do you start to outline it? Do you research? What's your process for even getting it going when you're approaching a difficult subject matter?
Typically, whenever I sit down and conceptualize a story, I'll kind of just look at it from all different angles. First, whether it's something I would ever want to read, and if it passes that test, then I'll sit down and kind of plot it out where it should start. Where it should come to, in the form of like your rising action, getting into your second act, third act, and then really the ending that I think is really fitting for that subject. So, yeah, whenever I think of something like that, or sit down to brainstorm a new story, that's kind of the process I take.
For me, I have this writer friend. And she was saying, like, she made a distinction between, like, someone who just writes by the seat of their pants and that has no idea where their story's going, and then sort of, like, ends up surprising herself. She said that's how she writes, is she just starts, she has, like, kind of conceptually, and then just starts plowing forward, and then, like, she has no idea how it's going to end or what's going to go on. And that whole idea for me is totally just horrifying. I cannot, there's no way I could do that. What I do, like, when I come up with, like, a concept, generally what I will do is have an idea, like, sort of like an overall concept, and then I will write an outline of, like, sort of major events that will drive the story forward, and then kind of the sort of, the conclusion of it. But I don't make, like, a kind of a formal outline. I just have sort of different scenes that happen in sequence, and I cut and paste and move them around as how it fits it. So I guess I'm sort of a hybrid in that I have, like, I know beginning, middle, and end and kind of major events, but I don't know. I do sometimes surprise myself in between, like, the things that come out, like, that get us from one event to the next. I often find that I sort of shock myself, surprising. Like, oh wow, that's really cool. I didn't know I had that in my head. That's fantastic.
How quickly do you guys think that you should get to the meat and bones of the problem in this situation? Because like when we look at anti-artists and you have your lead character who's struggling, and you're talking suicide and cutting and his desire for destruction of beautiful things, and he really struggles with a lot, and it's really pertinent to the story. But how quickly should you get into that? Should you just get into it and write it the whole book, or do you think that people should approach it maybe more slowly? And of course it's going to vary by book, but talk me through your process for deciding how soon and how quickly to get the meat and bones in there.
For me, basically what I read something, I swear it must have been Stephen King or something, and maybe On Writing or something, where he said you don't show everything, you don't show the reader everything you have up front, right? So you gotta like have some secrets, you gotta have some kind of mystery that like keeps moving forward. And for me, it's difficult, like that, being patient, like letting the story develop itself. That part is really difficult for me. Like I have this idea, and then I just want everything to come out. I want it to be an all big reveal, and I want to and then like if you do that too early, then what do you have left? Like what are you gonna do? Like what's gonna drive the story forward? What's the mystery? Why would the reader continue to read that? Something that Mike said that I really like is that and actually the Daniel O'Malley, who I went and saw last night, said the same exact thing. Is like, I write to amuse myself. I write stuff that I would like to read, and for better or worse, because I read kind of non-conventional books and interested in non-conventional stuff. So, if I write non-conventional stuff, then it's not, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to find an audience for that, because I'm a weirdo, so I need to find other weirdos to like my stuff, But as far as developing a story, I just write as hard and as fast as I can, and then themes emerge and things happen, and then you go through it and you're like, wow, this really works great, this doesn't work great. But getting it down first and foremost, that's the biggest job. And if you can do that, you can fix anything, you can change anything, you can tease out themes that you have. But if you don't have it down, you can't see what you got.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I feel like we have very, if not similar writing styles, very similar writing approaches. With my book that came out.
What is that book, Mike?
It's great marketing. When Life Hangs with Lemon. Came out September last year. But when I sat down to write that, just like Ralph, I had like my major beginning point, my major middle points, and then ending. But in between there, sit down, you try to write every day, and then you're plowing through. You give yourself a couple surprises, and honestly, at the end of that first draft, I hated my main character. I just couldn't stand him. He sounded so whiny to me. But having those scenes there and getting through that process, I knew what I wanted him to be like. So when I came back to edit, you tweak those things like you just said.
Did you ever want to take it farther than what you did in Lemons? Like, were you tempted to maybe take the kidnapping scene a little bit farther, or some of his contemplations about where he's at in his life and how he's so unhappy about where he's at in his life?
Not necessarily the kidnapping scene, because I feel like that played out just about as long or as it did. But I tell that story a lot through flashback, and there are some scenes I wish I expanded or built upon. I got the things I wanted to get in there. I just don't know, like you alluded to, maybe expanding them or exploring them more, because really that's what that book is to me, is kind of an explorative book about what it means to be alive, kind of, if I could just say in a simple term.
Yeah.
Well, I found when I was writing, have you ever seen What About Bob, where he keeps showing the book? Here it is. Anyways, I got mine. Look at that. I just got them today.
What is that?
But I found when I wrote Anti-Artists that what I found though is that I wanted things to work out better for people. There's a character in there, and she's a little girl, and I wanted it to work out a lot better for her. I wanted her to have a happier resolution to her kind of story arc. And I found that I didn't believe it. I couldn't come up with a way for it to be nice for her. And I also, when you said about like pulling back, I had a scene in my original idea which was really violent, and I ended up really having to rethink my whole thing, because ultimately I want my main character to be sympathetic, and I want it to be more about him, like more about redemption than it is, and there's only so far you can go before you're too far gone. You know what I mean? To where I want the readers to be able to identify with him, and I want them to be able to be sympathetic, or at least want something better for him, you know. And if he was too like too bad, or if things went too far, you can't fix that. The reader will just pull back. I don't know, but I think like I wanted him to ultimately get a good. So I had to cut that whole scene. I had to rethink this whole driving force. I had to because I was like, that's a little too much. Like that's a little, you know what I mean? Like it's a little too much, and I want something better for him. And
that's kind of my next question is, how do you decide when is too much and when it's art? Because I start to think about when American Psycho first came out and all of the backlash against how violent the book was, and the character, just how people thought he was so unrelatable and he scared some people. But then it became this huge cult classic, and people started discussing underlying themes, and it of course came out into a movie and kind of, I think, catapulted Bret Easton Ellis. But I mean, American Psycho is a pretty violent book, so how do you know how far is too far?
Yeah, I don't know, and I wish I knew the answer to that. I have this idea, like I always have this moment where I'm writing something, and I write pretty hard. I do my best to write as honestly and as fearlessly as I can. But I always have this moment where I think, man, my mom's gonna read this. My grandma will probably want to pick this up at one time or another. And I'm not even kidding. I honestly sometimes I'm like, even with Anti-Artists, I sometimes am nervous about recommending it to certain people. You know what I mean? Where I'm there's a really nice old lady who works the front desk at my office, and I'm she's like, oh, you're a writer? And what have you done? And I'm yeah, I wrote a novel. It's really great. You should check it out. And I'm but should she? But should she check it out? Really, is this? I don't. There's a presumed relationship between an author and his work, I think, that this is somehow reflective of me, and in a large way it is. But in a large way, it's just me sort of exploring ideas and seeing what I could come up with, and presenting sort of concepts in a way that might be interesting for people to read, not necessarily what I think is a good idea. And I wrote an author's note in the beginning of it saying, look, if anything in this book sounds like a good idea,
yes,
seek help. Here's some numbers, because this is about broken people. If you're thinking oh wow, these are fantastic ideas, maybe you want to pump the brakes there, Chico. You know what I mean? Maybe you want to back it up a little bit. Talk to somebody, because it would be nice for these guys in my book to have somebody to talk to. You know what I mean? To have somebody to be whoa, this is getting out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if either of you have read the YA novel 13 Reasons Why. I just finished it, and it's basically a girl commits suicide, and she sends tapes to the people who pushed her to commit suicide, telling them why they were part of her suicide, and then their job is to send it to the next person and the next person and the next person and the next person, and you see how it just kind of tears these kids apart, and then people at the beginning know what people at the end do. And I really wanted to like the book for the way that it was set up, but then I got really aggravated because I felt like it was glorifying suicide. David!
Hi guys, sorry I'm late.
Hey David, how are you?
Hello, good, thank you. Good to see you all.
At the beginning we said you might pop in, but you're busy working and things like that. So back to that thought just real quick, and then I'll ask David a question and let him join in. I felt like the book really glorified suicide, and it, if I recall right, the book didn't have anything like what Anti-Artist did, where it said if you're feeling like this is a good idea for you, then you know, here's some contact information for you. So I felt that was really inappropriate kind of for a YA novel for the main character to have planned her suicide so hard and then convince people they're the reason she killed herself. So I like what you did with your book. Long story short, to get there, Ralph. So David, Anvil Soul, we've got a deep message in here with the Catholic Church and a big scandal in the church. And the book changed a lot because originally it was third person. We asked you to go and write it in first person. And it really changed and gave more life to the book. But again, here's another difficult subject. You've got pedophilia, you've got rape. But the way that it comes across is in a very relatable manner to where I don't think people are going to get offended by it. Whereas the first book, there were some scenes that I think people may have found a little hard to digest, but they were still pertinent to the story. But how do you come across writing about something like pedophilia and getting it into people's minds where they want to talk about it instead of turning them off?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very difficult subject to deal with properly, but I think it's a fair subject to deal with because it's something that occurs in society all the time. And one thing I find that if you're not talking about issues that are so serious, then they have a tendency to take over. They have a tendency to become like a type of growth. And if you don't confront it, and you don't confront it as strongly as you can, and this applies to all sorts of terrible things in society, it boils over into anger and hatred. So I think that I decided that I would like to talk about this issue and discuss how serious this is. And it doesn't just happen in the Catholic Church, of course. It happens in all sorts of areas of society. But I happen to have a lot of experience with the Catholic Church. And I thought, well, what difference can one person make in a situation like this? And that's the question I started with. What sort of difference can one person make in a situation like this when everyone's against you, when you know something terrible is happening? And that's where I put my character, James O'Ryan. I put him as the one person who has an obligation to do something about a serious issue. And how does he react? What sort of reaction does he have when faced with it? And I considered, how would I react to such a situation? And it worries me that there's a chance that I might just leave. I thought about this very carefully, that I might think this is too much, I might leave. But I like to think that I would stand up to a problem. So I want to bring into what I thought when I was writing the book was I want to make people think about a serious situation and what difference can we make at our level. And this can be in any problem that you face in life. What difference can I make? What if I'm unpopular? What if there's some terrible loss that I might incur from taking this stand? And I wanted to play and see how the character developed. Now, I set it in a small town, and it's about 10,000 people, so it's only a very small town. But I think small towns worldwide have a similarity in that if you're not fitting in, then you're uniting everyone else against you. I think that can happen in a small town very easily. And that was another issue that because I lived in a place I lived in Temora for 8 years, a small town in which the book's set. And I saw people committing suicide. I know people who committed suicide in the town because they felt like they didn't fit in. And I know of certain issues, sexual assaults, things that occur everywhere, of course. But in a small town, you have the opportunity to know the people involved. You get an opportunity to know the people involved personally because they're your neighbours and all go to the same church, they all go to the same shops. And so I thought this is ideal to get a main character, challenge them in such a way that how are they going to react in such difficult circumstances, and to set it in a small town where there's a chance you won't always fit in. And it's not like a city where you can find friends, you can move neighborhoods, you can do all those sort of things. In a small town, you really are, it's a tribal sort of feeling at times, and you are at the mercy of other people. So they're the issues I wanted to explore, and I picked the problem of pedophilia because it's such a terrible, life-destroying business. It's such a life-destroying crime that if we as individuals don't stand up against it, I feel, if we don't face it, we don't discuss it, a lot of young people's lives can be ruined. So that's what all the background thought is with Anvil's Soul. That's what I was thinking.
Great, thank you. What do you guys have to chime in on that, Mike or Ralph? Like, Mike, if somebody was to come to you and say, my book is full of difficult content, I'm writing about pedophilia, how do I even find a market for my book? Should I not write about it at risk of losing market for my book?
I think we kind of spoke to this a little bit in the beginning. If it's a subject that you're interested in, I don't think you should ever put it down. You should explore it. As long as it's exploratory and you're writing it for the right reasons, I think any subject matter is on the table at that point. And as David so eloquently put, this subject touches a lot of people worldwide. So it's not like there's not an audience for it. I mean, so, you know, I just think as long as you do it delicately and you do it justice, I mean, you'll be in good shape.
That's such a good point. I agree 100%. You don't want to be lecturing people. You want to be reflecting what's occurring, I think. I think lecturing, when you start lecturing people in your writing, you've lost it. I really think you should offer up a mirror to society instead. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. I think as far as like writing for a market, to me, I'm such a purist about these things. You know, I mean, we run into this all the time with trying to find ways to market that doesn't like creep me out. You know, but I think like if you have a story, you should write it, and I think like that's kind of the main thing, and that should be your main takeaway. If you're gonna like, for me, I've always said, who cares about a market? If you have a story, write it as hard as you can, write as well as you can, make it as good as you can, and it'll find an audience. Your audience is there if you make something good. You know what I mean? Like that's really it. Like good quality stuff first, make good, write well. You know, I mean, step one, write well, and it'll find a market. There wasn't a market for, you know, vampire dystopian books until someone wrote one, right? Like there wasn't a market for like these like kind of magical Harry Potter books that you see popping up now, like until she created one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The market will arrive. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Dave.
I'm just sorry, I'm just agreeing. They didn't say, where's all the Harry Potter books? J.K. Rowling created that with her great writing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Like, if you create a world or do create characters or create words in such a way that people respond to it, that's your market. You know, it will be there as long as you do it well enough that people can respond. And that was kind of like, I mean, speaking about like writing hard, you know, like writing fearlessly, and I was talking about, you know, my mom's gonna read it, and that's kind of always my joke, like, you know, like, oh man, my mom's gonna eventually read this, you know, so you gotta like pull back a little bit. But honestly, I feel like I wrote my book in such a way that honestly, these are people that I respond to. You know what I mean? These are my people. These sort of like outcast people. Like these are people that I have known or will know or do know or that I was at one time, or you know what I mean? Like these are recognizable people. And if you can recognize these people in your life, whether it be from a parent's perspective who had a kid with some sort of addiction issues or some sort of like mental illness, or you were a kid who did, or you were affected by it in some way. I think people will connect to that. Like whether or not it's like, I had this, my wife's boss, who's like a friend of ours. This is kind of out of her wheelhouse, right? Like this sort of is like not. This is, I mean, I wouldn't. She's another person that I was sort of like, yeah, you should maybe read it, like, yeah, that's fine, I guess. But she actually, she responded to it in a way. She actually wrote me a really nice review on Amazon too. But she responded to it in a way that was like, she recognized these issues. She felt sympathetic to the characters. I mean, not from her own personal perspective, but from people that she knew, or like, and she sort of, I mean, unless she was lying to me, she came away with like a different perspective on things that she had observed in other people. And I mean, to me that was like incredible that she was like, she said that to where it was like, I didn't really think about it in this way before, or I didn't really understand what someone was going through at this time. And to me, I was like, I mean, that was pretty awesome. Like when you get like some sort of like, when you're people that read your stuff like actually connect with it in a way that you didn't expect or didn't plan. It's really pretty awesome, pretty amazing.
Yeah. So I'm curious from each of you, what is the most difficult, or the book with the most difficult content that you've ever read? Dun, dun, dun.
For me, it's Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I found that difficult. But the reason I found it difficult though was not because of the relationship. I found it difficult because the writing was so beautiful and the writing was so pure that I fell in love with Lolita too. And I'm not inclined in that way. It's just the way that he wrote was that I could see that, and that upset me. That's what challenged me there, because the writing was so beautiful and Nabokov was so clear that I was thinking Humbert's okay, and then I had to catch myself and say, this is not okay. So that's where I got upset. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I'd probably have to go with probably The Stranger. I think it's because I picked it up way early in my life. I was a freshman in high school when I first read it. And it was really the first book I kind of just, I was taken aback by it because I didn't know, first of all, I didn't know you could have your protagonist be such an apathetic, for lack of a better term, jerk. Felt like I was going to say something else there. But he was just so apathetic, and then the second part of the book is him contemplating his life and how it really has no meaning to him, so he's just going to accept his fate and walk out to the gallows. It kind of just blew my mind.
That was a great book.
Yeah.
I've never read that. I'm going to check it out.
I think you'd...
Do you know what else? A friend of mine told me that Anti-Artists was like... he told me that it was like... He said it reminded him of Catcher in the Rye meets Clerks, which I thought was like pretty awesome. Like I was like, that's amazing. What a great... I love Clerks. But I never told him my shameful secret, which is I've never read Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, no.
I know. It's like my secret literary secret. I've never read it. And people are like, oh, it's like one of those ones that I should have read. As far as my book, I kind of started tough, and I started with like horror novels, and I've loved them. They're scary and bloody and violent, and so that kind of element never really got to me. The book that rocked me probably the hardest was Marabou Stork Nightmares by Irvine Welsh. And when I got to the end of that, it ruined me probably for days. Like, it just shook me. Like, it's an amazing book if you can get into it. It's a tricky read. There's a lot of, like, he writes in, like, Scottish dialect, so there's a lot of like kind of a steep learning curve for language-wise. And then there's like this thing. Anyways, it's an amazing book, and it really set me for a loop for a while. So full of just despair in the end. It's so bad. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to relive it. It's terrible. It's awesome. Amazing writing, just absolutely incredible. But that's a tough read.
Great. Well, I don't know if that's great. That is a tough read, but those are all three really good books there. I really don't know if I have anything to contribute as far as difficult books, but growing up, I was always really intrigued by the Holocaust, so I read a lot of books on World War II, which sometimes, depending on the writer, fictionalizing the Holocaust can be really challenging. Like, I know a lot of people love The Book Thief, but I cried through that entire book because it just humanized the experiences that people were going through in a really beautiful way. But I haven't read anything that's really too challenging outside of that. I like to stick to my like safe novels like these. So let's close this down because we've hit our half an hour. I know some people need to go to bed, some people need to go back to work, and I need to, I don't know, start my day, I guess. So if you want to chat with us more about difficult content, if you are writing a book that has difficult content and you don't know how to approach it and you want to talk to an author that has experience in this field, you can reach out to David, Mike, or Ralph online. You can also tag us at FP Bookworks on Twitter, and we can forward it on to one of these guys as well. But we're going to let them go down the list, reintroduce themselves, and tell you how to get in contact with them, the name of their book, and then we will see you guys next week. So we'll go Ralph, Mike, and David.
Okay. I am Ralph Pullins. I am the author of Anti-Artists. It's just the greatest American novel ever written by me. And you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at @RDPullins. I'm also on Facebook, but I still haven't figured out how to do the links. I'm sure it's facebook.com/Ralph Pullins or something like that. I have a website, and it's ralphpullins.com, and I think that's about that. That's me.
Mike Hansen. What? Go ahead.
I was pulling a Scott. Since Scott isn't here, I just let you guys go in turn, whereas Scott's so perfect at, going, okay, now for you, Mike.
Moderator.
Mike Hansen, author of When Life Handles Lemon.
I got that one. That's good. That's a good book.
Yes. A little bit about that book. Since we talked about it today, I'll just say that it's kind of an exploration of what it means to live and maybe some choices you make throughout your life and how that sets you up for the end. You can find me on Facebook, and Twitter's at Fatty Hansen, FATTHANSEN. And my website's www.fattyhansen.com.
And my name's David O'Sullivan, and my next novel's coming out on the 20th of the next month. It's called Anvil Soul, and you can get in contact with me at www.davidgosullivan.com. So it sort of reads like David Go Sullivan, and that's a good way for me to remember it because I have a terrible memory. Please get in contact with me if you want to talk about any of these issues about challenging writing, because I really love to hear from people. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all today. Oh, there's a cat.
Kitty! We all had our dogs and everything with us before the call started. So one day we might just have to have like a talk about pet books and let the pets chime in.
Yes. Oh, there's
another cat off.
Oh,
Mike?
Kitty! I have to tell you, one of my favorite lines from Anvil Soul is, "But who's going to take care of the cat?" And I don't know why, Ralph. I don't know why. Just when I read that line, I laughed so hard. So. Anti-Artist, yeah.
It's early there. It's 7:30.
I have to go to the doctor to get shots, so I'm all like, ah. So anyway, so that's how to get in touch with all of these guys. Always, like we say, check out their websites because they do a lot of blogging, short stories, flash fiction, poetry, really intriguing things, and you can really get into the spirit of how they write. And of course, most of them love to talk to you online. Like Fatty Hansen said last time, he might block you, but go ahead and try anyway. Gotta be real about it. No, but really, reach out, ask us any questions that you have, and then we'll see you next week. Always every Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you go to our Google Hangout page, you can see the list of upcoming chats. So we'll talk to you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us today.
Thank you. Bye.